Welcome to episode 11 of my prediction series. I know some of you are probably going to be asking why I'm uploading this on a Wednesday instead of a Friday, and to answer that question for those who aren't already aware, this week's schedule is a lot different from the normal one. This time around we're getting a few Thursday and Friday matches, but don't get it confused. There might be more days of matches, but that does not mean we're going to be getting more games. In fact, we're only getting 9 this week instead of 10. Besides that, we have a couple of other housekeeping things to go over. Thing number 2 we need to discuss quickly is my record from week 10. To put it simply, my predictions were garbage. 4-6 is no bueno. The Titans being unreliable as well as me not putting enough trust into Dallas and Toronto choking really screwed me over. My record on the year now sits at 39-22. Hopefully I can bounce back this week. As for the third and final thing on the agenda, we have to talk about the week 11 hero pool. For this one, we've got no Reinhardt, McCree, Widowmaker, or Brigitte. I'm getting some mad week 5 vibes right now. Other than Moira, the bans are completely identical. Does that mean we see the return of Winston and Soldier? Perhaps, but Orisa Bunker and May could still be viable too. Maybe Torb gets some playtime as well. The only thing I'm sure of this week though is that we likely will not see Deathball comps being ran with no Reinhardt being available. My honest opinion with this week's meta is that it's difficult to get a complete grasp on what to expect. For this week, I'm going to be a bit more conservative with my picks. Instead of basing my predictions off what I think the meta is going to be, I'll primarily just be basing them off which team I think is better. So yeah, apologies for that lengthy intro, but now we're done with it, so let's get started with our first game on Thursday. At 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Atlanta Reign play the Washington Justice, and after what I saw last week, it's now more apparent than it's ever been before that the Washington Justice will stink. Their losses continue to pile up, and it's been over a month since the last time they've tasted victory. And since that win, none of their games have been all that close. Is it too late for these guys to bounce back from the rough 2-7 start? No, of course not. But they have to start winning their games right now, or at the very least, they have to show more signs of life if they do end up losing. But with their opponents being a very angry Atlanta Reign team that just got denied a reverse sweep over Philly, I do not like their chances of getting back on track this week. The Reign have to be feeling really upset since all their critics can keep on getting on their case for not being able to defeat top tier competition. The good news for Atlanta though is that the Justice in theory should serve as a nice punching bag to help them get back on track. In Atlanta's 3 wins this year, they have clean swept low to mid-tier table teams, and with the Justice falling into that category, I'm expecting a similar result. I predict a 3-0 Atlanta victory. Regardless of what the meta ends up being, the Justice are clearly not in a good place. The Dallas Fuel game is prime evidence of this. They made countless errors and straight up got outplayed. And now they're playing an even better team, so what reason is there for me to believe this time's going to be any different? They'll have to come up with the game plan of their lives if they want to have a different outcome. But nothing makes a difference here, I feel. It's Corey versus the world. But with guys like Erster, Edison, and Baby Bay looking so good this year, it's just too much for one man to handle by himself. With that said though, from the pure entertainment aspect, look out for Corey versus the Atlanta DPS. Should make for a fun matchup. Now for the second matchup of Thursday night, the first Battle of LA in 2020. In past years, this rivalry has always been one to look forward to. This year it's hard to say the same though. The combination of the Valiant getting worse and there not really being a crowd really diminishes the hype that usually surrounds it. But even so, this game serves as a great chance to cover lost ground. For the matchup itself, the Gladiators should be the stronger team. Anything can happen, but I give the Gladiators a much better shot to win. The only thing I think the Valiant could be better at is DPS, and even that is nowhere near guaranteed. KSP and KSF have shown great potential as a duo, so there's reason to have confidence if you're a Valiant fan, but I kind of think that Birdring, Mirror, and Jarov proved their worth as well, so it's not going to be easy. The rest of the team, though, I can't really say the same for. I suppose McGravy could maybe hold his own against Space 2, but that's as far as I'll go. Speaking of McGravy, this is a big game for this guy. In a way, it's big for Space too since he's taking on his former team. But with Space being the superior player, there's a lot more pressure on McGravy here. McGravy will get destroyed if he doesn't play at the top of his game, and he has to show up for the sake of the fans. He needs to give all of them a reason to believe they don't need Space anymore. In my opinion, this will be one of the most important games of McGravy's career. This is probably the individual matchup I will be looking at the closest. Whether it's on Diva or Sigma, he has to find a way to prove himself. But overall, there's a lot that needs to go right for the Valiant, so I'm picking the Gladiators to win 3-1. I think the Valiant might give them some trouble here and there, but it's nothing they can't handle. As of right now, I don't trust the likes of Gig, Dreamer, or Rain to have a good enough day to keep their team in the game. Continuing onward with this very spread out week, the Florida Mayhem take on the Paris Eternal in the first of 3 Friday matches on the schedule. This is an interesting one. With the news coming out a few days ago announcing that Xe would be out of commission while he seeks treatment for an injury he's dealing with, it's going to be Soon and Nico will have to pick up the slack. Soon is no doubt a great player, and I'm fairly certain we'll see good production out of him, but carrying on without Xe while still not having access to Sparkle is going to hurt. Luckily for Paris, they've already shown that they can win or at least be competitive even if Xe isn't there. Thoroughly beating Houston and losing in a map 5 to a full-strength Philly team is proof of this, but the question is, how long can they keep this up for? Florida might be considerably worse, but we know they're capable of making good teams earn their wins over them, even if the scoreline would tell you otherwise. In my opinion though, Paris could have Florida beat in a few different places. If a fair amount of Tracer is played, then Soon is going to have his way against Yaki and BQB. If Torb comes out, I still have confidence that Soon can find a way to be effective, as he's shown he can be good on Torb in that Philly match. The other place I like Paris better at is main support. FD God, in my opinion, has to be leagues better than Chris right now, and with Lucille still being in the rotation, it wouldn't be all that surprising if this trend continues. But I mean, if Florida does find a way to have these factors not be an issue, then there's a chance they make this a match. They absolutely do have the firepower to potentially keep up here. Somebody like Gangnam Jin or Gargoyle, they've shown the ability to be reliable playmakers, and if they play a good set while the rest of the team doesn't really feed or get in their way, then anything's possible realistically. Speaking of Gargoyle, him versus Hanbin should be quite the show. These are two of the league's rising stars at this position. This battle could be one of many in what could end up becoming an epic rivalry one day. So the question is, does Florida have what it takes to pull this off? In my opinion, the answer is most likely no. I'm going 3-1 Paris. Any success Florida has found this year has come against inferior competition. They have found zero success against top-of-the-mill teams, and even mid-table teams like London have given them issues. Until Florida proves to me that they have what it takes to beat solid competition, there is no way I could even think of picking them to win a game like this. Next up, we've got the Battle of the Houston Outlaws sacrifices when the Uprising try and get the revenge over the Defiant. Boston is coming off a poor performance in general last week, while Toronto is probably hurting after that massive choke against Houston. The question is, can this result be any different than the last meeting? Boston didn't put up much of a fight in their first encounter, and with how weak they've looked as a unit this year, I'm of the mindset that they're at a noticeable disadvantage yet again. Toronto are just better all around. Beast has been doing slightly better than Fusions. Toronto's DPS lineup feels stronger as Jerry kind of has to carry most of the time, and the supports are simply more consistent. Nevix versus Brucin is a bit more interesting since Brucin has played very little, but if the meta does prove to be more than just Orisa Sigma, then Brucin has to prove he can flex just as well as a veteran of the game like Nevix, and I don't know if I trust him to do that as he's unproven on things not named Sigma. The only hope Boston has of winning this is if they can expose the Defiant like how Florida did back in the day. But that could only really happen if the meta goes in a similar direction to that first week of hero pools, and nothing's guaranteed. Realistically thinking, I just don't know if Boston can execute at that high of a level. Since that one win against Houston, they've looked lost. Every single week feels like the same exact thing. They try their best to outplay their opponents in the mirror, but end up failing. Even with the Defiant being a very inconsistent team, it's hard to imagine they choke against arguably the weakest roster in the league. My prediction is that Toronto breaks the trend of teams getting their revenge in rematch games as they take advantage of Boston's shortcomings in a 3-1 victory. Even after such a heartbreaking loss, my guess is that Toronto shakes it off and they get the win for Feifei, who recently stepped down as the head coach and is now retiring from pro Overwatch. Boston could potentially take advantage of this with emotions running high, but I have my doubts, especially after their backup main support Swimmer also announced his departure from the league. Now then, to wrap up the weekday matches, we end the night with a week 1 rematch between the Dallas Fuel and San Francisco Shock. In my case, many will say I have an unpopular opinion here, but this is going to be the first key match of the week. My gut feeling tells me that this game is going to be close somehow. It's strange because in most cases I'd say Shock win with relative ease, but the confidence of Dallas is rising right now. Sure, it came against 2 weaker teams, but the fact of the matter still remains that they're on a nice little winning streak right now. Decay and Doha have caught fire recently, and with a challenge as mighty as this one presenting itself, those two are likely to be extra motivated. On the other hand, the Shock have also gotten back on the right track recently thanks to a few revenge games that they won pretty easily. This is one of those matches where 2 confident teams are going to be locked in. Both in Overwatch League and sports in general, two confident teams going head to head usually makes for a good matchup. It's not always the case obviously, but the league is kind of overdue for one of those matchups, so why not roll the dice and predict it to be this one? I know it may seem stupid because the last time Dallas played a good team they got rolled, but sometimes a win or two is all it takes to improve a team's mindset, and Dallas seems like one of those squads that is very momentum based. So what happens when two teams riding a wave of confidence clash with one another? I for one am thinking the end result will be a 5-map series that is closer than the last match they had. Even if the opponent is mighty, Decay and Doha very well could end up keeping their team in this game until the very end. Combine that with the consistency of Gamsu, and Dallas suddenly has a chance. However, in my opinion, Dallas will inevitably fall short as they always seem to do. Even if the consistent Dallas players show up, that does not necessarily mean they'll completely outplay their counterparts. If anything, I think those matchups end up evening out. And everywhere else, the Shock take the cake, let's be honest. Choi's astronomically better than Note, and while the Dallas support line has been decent this year, the support line of the Shock simply has higher upside. With this in mind, I predict that the Shock win 3-2 as the Fuel surprise some people by playing up to their competition. With the amount of emphasis I've been putting on the DPS, this is the main part of the match I'll be observing closely. The young and explosive duo of Doha and Decay have a second chance to prove themselves against championship caliber superstar DPS players. I pray that we get to see Striker versus Decay on Tracer. That would be legendary. Anyway, now we transition over to Asia for the rest of the weekend. To start Saturday, we've got the Hunters and the Charge. At this point in time, I never know what to think of the teams playing in China and Korea. It almost feels impossible to get a read on them. Every game either feels super close or like a total blowout. That trend has carried over through several weeks, and it's hard to see it stopping with how often we cycle through different metas. I could probably just pick predictions out of a hat and still somehow get some of these right. That's how random this region is. Back on topic of the Charge Hunters game though, something tells me that Chengdu is going to play a bunch more Wrecking Ball this week. No McCree or Brig allows for Among to get a lot more value even if there still are direct counters to him in play, but that's just what the Hunters like to do, you know? Wrecking Ball comps that enable their DPS to pop off is what the Hunters like the most. I've talked about it here on the channel a few times in the past, but the Hunters are one of those teams that you either can read like a book or you just absolutely struggle to gain control over. If their first matchup tells you anything, the Charge fall more under the second thing. The Hunters and Charge rivalry is usually pretty fun to watch, so I'm going to consider this a key match. The two teams responsible for the Titans' first ever 0-2 week in the Overwatch League meet each other for the 5th time. What will the result be this time? I'm thinking that it's going to be close regardless of the outcome. The Hunters have the stellar play of their DPS plus a chaotic playstyle, while the Charge have reliable playmakers across the board with a very stable style. When two opposite ideals clash, it goes without question that things can get quite messy. It's pretty up in the air, but I'm selecting the Charge to win yet again in a 5-map thriller. Nero for some reason has these big games against the Hunters, and I'm going to say that history yet again repeats itself as Nero along with Happy and Krong backing him up do just enough to get this win. Next up is the Shanghai Dragons versus the Hangzhou Spark, and unlike last time, I'm not going to make the same mistake of assuming the Spark will win because of a meta that won't even end up happening. Strictly looking at it from how these two have performed so far, the Dragons have been better. Other than one hiccup against the Hunter, Shanghai have been flawlessly destroying the opposition. In their 4 wins, they have only dropped 1 map. They dismantled the Spark the last time they played, and it's hard to believe they aren't in the same position to do so again. Other than the meta itself, nothing else has changed. It's the same teams. Shanghai has proven to me that they're going to be consistently good no matter what they have to play. They have flexible playmakers everywhere you look. Stand1 and Void have been very reliable so far. Fleta Demon Lip have all been taking turns popping off on a game-to-game basis. Then both Izayaki and Lee Jae Gon have looked like one of the best support duos in the league. The Spark have firepower as well, but their overall ability to succeed is diminished thanks to Rhea supposedly dealing with a wrist injury plus their DPS simply not being as good. Like, Godspeed is solid and he could definitely hold his own, but Shanghai has them beat at flex DPS. Fleta is the meta again, folks. I'm getting Season 1 Dynasty vibes with how often he's contributing towards his team's success. While the Spark on paper are pretty close to the Dragons talent-wise, I believe there is a gap at off-tank, flex DPS, and just with overall synergy. And that's why I've got the Dragons winning 3-1. The Dragons have been on a reign of terror as of late, and until one of their Chinese counterparts shows me otherwise, I'm going to continue to pick Shanghai to win against them. Now it's time to talk Sunday. Match number 1 is between the Charge and Spark. I know I already highlighted the Charge's first game as a key match, but this is going to be a key match for me as well this week. Spark versus Charge has always been very interesting. From a head-to-head perspective, it's dead even really, and their previous 2 meetings from this season were extremely close. 2 map 5s between these two already. No matter what the meta is, it almost feels as if they're destined to have another close duel. I'll make this quick. My stance on these two goes as follows. The Charge have a stronger off tank, a more dependable flex DPS, and in my opinion, a slightly better hit scan and flex support. The Spark on the other hand have a much stronger playmaker at main tank, and IDK is arguably top 5 main support in the league. Talent-wise, I believe the Charge do hold a slight advantage. I'm going to say that this time the Charge win the 5-map series in this epic Season 3 rivalry. Like with their matchup against the Dragons, I predict that off-tank ends up being a slight problem that ends up getting exposed if you're the Spark. Don't get me wrong, Sassen has been pretty decent since taking over, but in my opinion he has shined his brightest on Zarya, and since Ryan is out of the hero pool, there is pretty much no reason to play her. I'm going to say that Krong also finds a way to get the better of Sassen, while the rest of the Charge players do a good job of supporting him in what might end up being a monster day for Krong. And finally, to wrap up Week 11, the Shanghai Dragons take on the Chengdu Hunters. Now that the Dragons have already proven to me that they can learn from their mistakes and beat the Hunters thoroughly because of the lessons they've learned, I don't see any reason why the Hunters will be a problem again. In my opinion, the Dragons are still superior in pretty much every way other than ball comps. So long as they don't feel tempted to match the Hunters on it, they should be in good shape. Generally speaking, Shanghai has shown to be a far more consistent team, and 9 times out of 10, consistency is a lot more valuable than taking a chance on a team that is known for pulling these upsets every once in a while. For those 2 reasons, I say the Dragons 3-0 the Hunters. Chengdu often feels like they depend on 1 or 2 guys to carry them, while the Dragons tend to show a total team effort a lot of the time. As the saying goes, teamwork makes the dream work. Unless Shanghai throws or falls into the trap of trying to out-cheese the Hunters, I do not see a world where the Dragons choke this as they continue to build upon an excellent start to Season 3. And with that said, I'm done here. So now I turn things over to you. Who do you have winning this week, and what are your meta predictions? Let me know down in the comments section. If you enjoyed this content, then be sure to hit that like button and sub if you haven't already done so. And if you're interested in supporting me beyond my content, then consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, or purchasing a channel membership for some exclusive perks. And as always, thanks so much for watching today's video. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.